I am pleased today to introduce our two speakers. We have Megan Howie. She's the Associate Dean for External Relations at the Whiting School of Engineering at the Johns Hopkins University, and we are thrilled to have her. She is an experienced advancement professional with more than 2 decades of experience and an awesome resume as she's climbed the ladder there and done all sorts of wonderful things, including some huge development programs that she's done there, raising lots of funds to help out the great cause there at Johns Hopkins. And the other one is Chip Edmonds, who is the Senior Leader in Institutional Advancement and External Relations also in beautiful Williamsport, Pennsylvania at Lycoming College. Has a very distinguished resume, including times at Yale and other things going on too. And I'm not going to go to belabor the point too long because we go here all hour just talking about their resumes. I'm going to ask them each to give us one cool thing about themselves. So Megan, can you go first? Tell us one cool thing about yourself.
One cool thing. One cool thing. I'm a cat person. I have kittens, and every kitten that I had when I was little, I caught it when it was wild. So I never got it. I actually got it from different places where I was at a restaurant and saw kittens or a golf course. So the kittens that I caught were all wild. And
Wow.
I rescued them.
I love it. Wildcats. All right.
Yeah.
Give us one cool thing about yourself.
Well, since Phil raised this in our little early chat, I'll just share a broader story that first I'm a PK. My dad's a pastor. If pastor's actually retired, he's not formally serving a church at this point, but served in the Baltimore Washington Conference for many years. And as part of that, we got for several summers went to music and arts camp at what was Western Maryland, now McDaniel College, and many wonderful memories of making lots of music and getting to engage with lots of great people. So I'll just share that story more broadly since we were talking about it in the early moments of our webinar.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, let me give us a quick prayer and we'll get started. Dear Lord, just bless this time we have together, and we're just so appreciative of people taking the time to come in and learn more, to learn how to better do this thing called getting more resources so that we make more disciples. And Lord, just bless this time we have together. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Chip and Megan. Once again, I'll be monitoring the chat Q&A. The poll is up right now. Please make sure you go through the polls. I will promote that a little bit later. I guess in about 10 minutes or so, I will go ahead and publish that. You see the 2 questions about stock giving and what relief, extra community relief your church has done. And so we'll publish that in about 10 minutes. But Chip and Megan, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Frank. We'll get this up and running here. So I will go ahead and start navigating through these. Thanks to Frank for what are already some nice introductions. We did put some of that here for you. A lot of these screens and slides, what we will intend to do is just pass these along, and you can have these as a resource. We probably and actually surely have more here than we'll be able to do in our hour together. So in some cases, we'll just fly through these, and I think would welcome questions even as we go or at the end. Often this has been done in past experiences as a very interactive. There are exercises that we do together. So some of that will be truncated today. And we hope to be able to weave in what has been a fairly unprecedented time, not simply for Megan's and my sector in higher education, but the church, our nation and world, both in terms of the pandemic and even more recently, the significant civil unrest, and again, the painful exposure of what continues to be real social and racial injustice in our country and world. And so those things have a lot of meaning and connectivity to the work that you do and the work that we do. And so we hope to be able to weave in and unpack some of the ways in which that's impacting our work as Frank says, we go to make disciples and further the mission and work of both our organizations and our churches. So this is what we hope to be able to accomplish together today. So to be able to share best practices, to provide tools and frameworks for fundraising, and then And then, as we've noted or tipped our hat, to explore and discuss some of the significant challenges we face as a society, and how that indeed correlates with our work in philanthropy or stewardship. So I'm going to kick it to my colleague Megan, who will lead us off in this section of our presentation.
Great, thanks, Chip. So let me just echo a lot of what Chip said. We're really excited to be here today. And a lot of our presentation, we originally were supposed to come in March, and like many of us, we all had to kind of stop in our tracks and change things. And so as we weave through this was kind of talk about traditional fundraising, but I'm going to try to share with some of the things that we're doing now since COVID has hit. And so like for a university, one of the biggest things that has changed for us is you typically travel to fundraise. And so we've had to change our ways of engagement, in a complete 180 and change to virtual engagement. So we are no longer, as you can imagine, going on the road. The plus about it that we've decided is that we've learned that we can connect people without always having to be face-to-face. And so that is one of the biggest takeaways we've learned. In the beginning, if you would have asked me, would you ever feel comfortable soliciting somebody through a Zoom, I would say no. But that's changed a lot over the last few months, and I can share some examples of how that's changed. So one of the things that we really want to talk about is fundraising and why we are fundraising. When you think about it, it's always important to figure out why, who. Sometimes with attitude needed for success, fundraising, you have a lot of no's for the larger gifts and a lot of yeses. So you just have to continue to keep going and to make sure that you know what you're saying and who you're soliciting. So the next slide, please. So fundraising. So one of the reasons, you think about why you fundraise, it's to bring resources to your church, to offer better services, to fulfill your mission, the societal needs, and to make your community a better place. A lot of times those are the things that make people believe, but also want to contribute, and you're providing them an opportunity to give. The biggest thing with fundraising is also deciding who is the best person for fundraising. And so a lot of times, if you could do the next slide, please. If you think about it, it's not just you, and you have a whole congregation or and I should mention I'm Catholic, so sometimes I apologize if I use some of the words we use in the Catholic Church, but in the Catholic Church is your congregation. And a lot of times when you're a leader in a church or in an organization, you think that you need to be the one to solicit, and that's not the case. A lot of times if you just tell your story and you make a compelling case for why you need support, it really happens on its own, and also volunteers. The other thing we put on here is that typically when we look for people with the 3 T's, time, treasure, and talent. And we also look for work, wisdom, wealth. And what we've realized is when you go through, people contribute to your organization at different times throughout their life. And it's important that you realize that they're all resources, and some of those resources are their time and their talent. And sometimes it is actual cash. But it's important for you to steward all of those different things throughout your relationship with your donor. Next slide, please. Attitudes for success. So one of the things, and where a university is a lot different, and when it's actually interesting to come and speak to a church, because the number one place philanthropic support goes to is through churches. But the difference between a university and a church is you're in front of your constituency on a weekly basis. Universities are not. But the same thing is there, that you have to kind of believe. No one wants to, we always tend to sometimes when we're making a case for fundraising to show all the bad things. And if you help us, it'll be better. But a lot of times people want to be part of something successful. And so to be optimistic in why and what you're asking for is really important, and especially in times that, in bad times, that this is actually a good time to fundraise, because in a sense we're offering something better. So like for Johns Hopkins, for instance, one of the things that we did as an organization that's important for you to know is, as you've seen that map that's on the news a lot with the little dots, that came from Johns Hopkins. we actually, for the first 6 weeks of the COVID pandemic, we did not fundraise at all. And the reason why we didn't is because we wanted people to understand that we were a place for knowledge, and we wanted to be a source of knowledge versus a fundraising avenue at that point. But since then, at a place like Hopkins, we have a lot of needs. We've lost money in our critical care and in our patient care and tuition. And so now we're telling the story of how people can help us not get back on our feet, but continue to grow and to be able to offer resources to students and to patients who otherwise can't afford it. And so when you think about that in your church or your parish, how can you tell that same story is important for you to kind of correlate and to think, are there communities? And I know Frank asked, like, do you have funds set up to help people? People want to help people. And no matter what type of organization you're with, it really is about that personal connection and people helping people. But with that, you also have to be willing to step out of your comfort zone. So one of the things that I like to say to donors is, and in my own giving, I always like to give till it hurts a little bit. So you want people to give to the point that they have to think twice about it. But in the same respect, you sometimes have to force yourself to ask when it might not always be comfortable. And it depends on how you do it. But if you do it in a very respectful way, no one, at least in my experience, has ever really been that offended by me asking for money. If anything, they've been flattered that I thought that they could have an impact on the organization. So that's just one thing to think about. But it is important to realize that you do have to step out of your comfort zone. For gift officers in a university setting, we have metrics. So we measure people by the amount of asks they do. It's a lot more metric based, but we do ask them to kind of step out of that comfort zone to ask for money. The next slide. So we've talked, thinking about asking, one of the things that's important is that you should really kind of know who you're asking for. And so for you to really know the people that are contributing and your members of your parish or congregation, how many children do they have? Are they self-sufficient? Do they have grandkids? Are their college being funded? We find a lot of our older alumni are paying for their children right now to go to school. So we are very mindful of that when we also ask for money. The timing sometimes when people don't give might have to do really with the timing in their life. It doesn't mean they're not interested in your mission or your need. It just might have to do with their timing. Plans for retirement and lifestyle retirement. This has actually become even more, I think, crucial and critical in the last 10 or 15 years because people are living a lot longer. They want to make sure they have funds. And as an organization, we want to make sure they have funds too. So that's where planned giving, and I know that Frank, they have a whole session on planned giving, but that's where we also do a lot of our work in planned giving and future giving. You know, whether they've done a financial plan or estate plan, is the church part of this plan? This is actually a place where I think universities have really made a lot of headway and success with estate plans and just asking that question. It's a really easy way to just kind of ask, have you thought about putting your church into the estate plans? A lot of times, and you never assume, no matter how educated or how business savvy the person is, that their estate plans are up to date. And I will just share a quick story with you that we're working with the donor, has given money to Hopkins in the tune of $30 million. So you would imagine this person is, you know, worked very hard for their money. Well, they had a couple different estate plans that weren't finalized. And so now it's caught up in probate court. And what's unfortunate is it's not following what the donor wanted. And so the point of me sharing that with you is it's okay to ask for that. And in a university, we do ask for the first page of the actual will and the last page. And we do what's called a statement of intent that just really says what they think they want their money to go towards. And it's not binding. It's just something we keep in our records. What other charities do they support? You know, it's also in how do they rank them. So a lot of times when we meet with people, we will go through all these questions and just ask them. And usually people offer a lot of information. I've learned, and Chip probably can echo this, sometimes it's just talking about things and people start opening up more than you ever would imagine about some of this space. As long as you do it in a way that if they don't feel comfortable sharing it, it's fine, but you're there as a resource, because if you're looking at retirements and you're looking at things like that, there's ways they can also give that gives them a tax benefit that a lot of people, you can't assume that they know as well. So it's always good to ask the questions and provide people with the background. So once you know who the person is, you really need to think about what and how you're asking. Next slide, please. Is, whether you're crafting a compelling vision story. So a lot of times you should think about, like, what are you asking for? What is the opportunity? And know your needs. So the worst thing that has ever happened to me is when I'm in with somebody and I'm not prepared and they say, okay, I am asking people, sorry, this popped up. When people ask me, well, tell me what you need for $35,000. Tell me what you need for $25. You really should be prepared to know what needs and how you would use that money. And especially now, because people want to know where their money goes to. And so when you think about it, we call it an elevator speech. Next slide, please. But that really just means, what does your conversation look like? What are you saying to people? How do you have it in a concise way? So one of the things you should think about is it far-reaching? Is it optimistic? Is it something that can make people want to give? Does it unify and bring things together? And also, does it make a difference? Does it solve problems? Does it enhance your church? Does it really help? When you guys are mentioning, when you're mentioning the different things you're doing with organizations, how can you show that? So when Chip mentioned, we're in unforeseen times. And so what we're doing on the university side is we're not asking for the same things that we used to. We're not asking for the typical, will you help fund a lab? Will you help fund, our annual giving, which, some people call the black hole because it's unrestricted cash. We're asking for, can you help contribute to our COVID research, where we're making ventilator splitters, so ventilators can be used by 2 patients in a hospital versus 1. I work for the engineering school, so a lot of our technology is advancing and helping medicine. But also, I will share that while we're all part of one at Johns Hopkins, I work for the engineering school. We also were fundraising for the School of Medicine for 2 reasons. You want something that affects all people, but they have the most needs. So we asked, can you help our first line healthcare workers? $25 will buy a lunch or a meal, things that we normally would not do in the university setting. We've actually altered to change to do for this undergraduate populations. We have students that things that we take for granted that come to a place like Hopkins on scholarship, and because they've been sent home, they're now in environments that might not provide them that space that they can concentrate, or the bandwidth, or Wi-Fi. So we're providing services like that to our student body. Those types of things, we're really getting personal. I mean, I think when you think about COVID and you think about the racial injustice, the one thing that has happened, I think, across the board is you're more personal with people. You're in their houses now. And from TV shows, watching, if you watch any television shows, you're in people's living rooms, and with work and with the church, you're in each other's living rooms. And to actually use that and be authentic when you're speaking with someone, we believe is important. And I'll now let Chip, he's going to share about events and annual giving.
Thanks, Megan. So you covered a lot of ground there, and certainly I think you can hear some of the ways that things are changing, and the magical word. If anybody remembers the old Friends episode where they're trying to get the couch up the stairs and they keep yelling, pivot, pivot. That's what we're doing a lot of these days in this environment. And it is about, in stewardship, it's about being able to adjust and shift and actively identify the needs and priorities that you have within the church and broader societal needs. And the way in which you do that has had to change dramatically. And so just about every day we come to work right now, as I'm sure it feels very similar to you, we're having to adjust the ways in which we normally did things. And so these are sort of the facets of fundraising that we think it's important to kind of review. Events themselves, this is a tough time to be thinking about events, but it doesn't mean that you can't start to weave in or think about how to virtually do events. Now that takes some technology, although I think we found that as people get comfortable with the technology, it's not necessarily cost prohibitive in many cases. It's often a matter of getting your people equipped and prepared and enabled, or maybe confident enough to do this. But often we see events, perhaps I would say in our world, in the wrong way. We see events as a great way to raise lots of money. And what I would suggest is that events, if you see them as a way to raise tons of money, then they may or may not fulfill that mission. Benefits, we would suggest that they're a good way to build engagement. These are ways to connect with people. These are ways to communicate what the needs are, what the priorities are, and what the impact is of your church, your congregation, and the work that it's doing. And they should be built and can be built around the interests and skills of your volunteers. If you have people in your church that have particular gifts, that have particular interests, these are things that you can often build around. The old things of making quilts for the imprisoned, or for your college kids going off to school, or having large cooking and food events. If you've got people who are very skilled in those areas, that's where you want to leverage, and where you get better, stronger buy-in is when you build and you utilize the talents of the people in your congregation, and utilize and harness those abilities and skills to the benefit of the broader congregation and the work that you're doing. This events we also see as a fantastic way to sort of build build depth sort of on your bench, so to speak, for the range of people who will be involved meaningfully. There is a ton of data out there that says the people who are more involved and are more engaged in the life of your organization, for us, it's who's on our alumni board, who's on our board of trustees, who's on our athletic council, who's serving with our alumni and fraternity, sorority life groups. We build these structures because these are people that then come get closer. They better understand your needs. They better understand what's happening, and then in turn are more inclined to be engaged and be supportive. And of course, you need very good attendance to be able to be successful in terms of raising the dollars. So drawbacks, they are often a ton of work. And they are very dependent on timing, and so that's right now where it's all about timing at the moment. I'm sure many of you had, at least in our church growing up, we had the turkey and oyster dinner at a very specific time, and anything that would have been taking place normally surely has transitioned or looked much different, and perhaps even impacted the dollars that are coming into the organization, either for the normal operation of the church or if they're supporting some kind of missional need. And so again, this is where you come back to that pivot notion. And if there are specific things that folks have done with some of their events that were typically live events that you transition and were able to continue to secure some of the dollars that you need for those programs, would love to hear or share those in the chat box. As you can see, that often the dollars are small and moderate. It does take a lot of gifts. This is like events are often like a small arm of your annual fund, so to speak. These are small gifts that in aggregate hopefully will translate to more investment and more support for the church or for your specific congregation. And this is where I say when you're doing events, just eyes wide open. What you want to remember is that generally, if you're doing the stewardship work well, you will often be able to raise more through individual solicitations and stewardship. This does not mean you shouldn't do events. But what I would say is that just see events in the right way and understand the benefits of what they are. As I said, you want to see benefit. You want to see events as the way in which to broaden engagement, to deepen the kinds of feelings that people have about the work that you're doing. If you see benefits or the benefits through that lens, you are more likely, I think, to build and develop events that will function at a much higher level, so that you then have that follow-up work with people that are involved in those events to go to them for some individual follow-up and stewardship or solicitation conversations. So I will sort of buzz through these a little bit, but you'll have this as a resource. Annual giving, I think, is really in the wheelhouse of the church. If anyone, any organization really started this notion of loyally thinking about the work of an organization and the things that take place beyond your own needs and wants, it has been the church, and that has been for generations, for millennium at this point. And so honestly, when higher education started, years and years, 1,500 years later after the church, well, maybe not quite if you go back to certain, maybe I'll say 1,100 years at best, but at least from fundraising, probably 500 years we've been doing this work. We learned from the church. In fact, many of our institutions were based and grown and established through the church. And so our annual giving are really all tricks and trades that years and years ago we took from the church. It has continued to evolve. And Megan tipped her hat to this. Even when people make small gifts, they want to know exactly what it's supporting. That can be a very hard thing to do, but it's a very important thing to do. You need to establish that connective tissue between what their gifts are doing and the making their gift, and what that gift will do and the impact that it will have. Often in annual giving, when you're asking for annual gifts, you're not going to often see massive increases from year to year. And so often, this is when you're doing your stewardship campaigns. You might say to your congregation, okay, here's where our shortfall this year. Think about a 5% increase. Even at the high end, you might get a 10% increase. Often this is slow growth, but this is loyal giving that is absolutely vital to the work that you do. I'm curious to know how that is translating to the number of giving units in your congregations, because that's a very important measure. We measure it through alumni participation rates. The national average in higher education, as I noted here, is 8%. It's actually less than that now. It's dropped even down to about 6%. For those of you, I don't know if you have noted or seen this, but the new tax legislation that essentially from the Jobs and Tax Act of 2016 or 17 was it, essentially increased the standard deduction to about $24,000 for a family. So the vast majority of families, or a good number of families that were itemizing their taxes, are no longer. And so for some of your smaller, more loyal donors, the tax benefit is no longer there. And we have seen that on the higher education front. And so that's an important measure to continue to track and watch, because if your donor base continues to decline, you will obviously that's a trend that you need to be intentional about staving off. And so what I would suggest are those pieces in terms of connecting what those gifts do and the impact that they're having. And I'll mention as my final piece with annual giving, this is where technology really is important. And I'm sure that in your congregations, if you weren't using a lot of technology before for your weekly giving, I'm sure you are now. As that is an absolutely essential way to try and secure those resources when many of your congregants are watching from home and engaging virtually with your congregation. And so I'll pivot, the character of a major gift, I think, is it's a different animal from annual giving. And I would say that this is an area where higher education really gets into its own wheelhouse. In fact, I would argue that major gifts is where higher education has been able to have and make a significant difference. Megan mentioned that religion indeed is still the #1 area that is supported in this country. In fact, the USA Today, Giving USA Today just came out about 10 days ago. And again, 29% of all giving in the United States supported religious organizations. The next closest is higher education. But that's only 14%. So less than half of the support that is given to religious organizations. That's a significantly powerful statement about still who we are as a nation, even though the mix of that is changing quite a bit. But where we in higher education get to that 14%, that's where you hear, this $100 million gift, this $1.8 billion gift from Michael Bloomberg to Hopkins for access, to massive amounts of dollars that are supportive of higher education's area in medicine, in healthcare, but even for even at smaller institutions, $5, $10, $15 million gifts feel as if they are the norm, and those are incredibly impactful and what really changed the trajectory for an organization. And I would argue that this is important work and work that you within your own congregation can do. But you have to engage in the kind of conversations. They're not transactional in the same way that an annual fund gift is. These take time. They're purposeful. These are engaging conversations that go back and forth about growing edges within your church or within your congregation that need to be developed. A missional program with a sister congregation or whatever. These are the conversations that need to unfold over time, but with intentionality and vision and conviction that will lead to some of your congregants who decide, I'm going to do my major gift here. I have such belief in what's taking place and the impact of this program that this is where I want to leave $1 million, or this is where I want to give this gift in order to transform the character of worship life and impact of the work of the church here at this congregation. So I think it's important to just understand the character of events, major and planned gifts, and what each of them do and the ways in which they can serve in stewardship in really very different but important ways. One of the final pieces I'll mention when it comes to this work, some of you may be or may be familiar with from your institutions and their own fundraising is Seeing Day of Giving. And Megan and I, in our preparation for this, we talked through a lot of what we've been doing over the last few months in the midst of COVID-19, even before all of the racial injustice has just, I think, just distraught. I mean, it's destroyed many of us in the way in which we think about being hopeful and feeling like there is promise to feeling like, gosh, we still have just massive amounts of work to do. But given that, some organizations, in fact, I think Megan noted that Hopkins decided to stop fundraising at a particular point. Lycoming College did not do that. We had a day of giving, but we completely revamped and changed what it was that we were pursuing. And Lycoming is an interesting place in that we've been around for over 200 years. We are a very healthy and fiscally sound institution that is also very committed to opportunity. So about 40% of our students are Pell eligible students, which means they come from families with incomes of $50,000 or less. We also know that from COVID, the families that were disproportionately impacted were those who were already undersourced in significant ways. And so many of our families, if they're hourly employees, if they are working in service type jobs, they were on the front lines to lose their income. So our conviction and our commitment to raising dollars for our day of giving was all about those students. It was all about our commitment to making sure they can stay in school. And so when you do this work, you have to understand or figure out what is best for your organization and what communication is going to land well with your constituents. But you have to make that decision in the midst of these crises to decide, yes, it does make sense for us to continue to pursue dollars, but here's where we really need it. Here's where we're going to make a difference. And so that is a very important aspect to this work, and certainly this work in a time of crisis. This image, I think, will just tell you what fundraising looks like nationally in this country. You used to say there's the 80-20 rule. We talk about that as well. So 80% of the dollars come from 20% of the people who are giving. And that I'm curious, and if you haven't done that kind of work in your own congregation, that is, I think, a very healthy exercise to understand and to look at. In reality, philanthropy in this country looks more like the Eiffel Tower. You can have now 2 to 3% of your donors who are making up 95%, 98% of your gifts. And so that's a major shift. And I think that's also reflective, and someone would say this is dangerous might be too strong of a word, but certainly an unfortunate situation in our country, which more of the wealth is being concentrated amongst a fewer number of people. And so we're seeing that translate in the world of philanthropy. I think this is also indicative of what's going on with our tax legislation as well, that those who are giving smaller gifts are less incentivized to still continue to do that from a tax perspective. So this is where I tip my hat to, but this is worth you, I think, looking at if you'd like within your own congregations and taking some time to understand what that looks like, and because this will help you understand where you have some strengths within your congregation and the structure of giving, and where you might focus some of your attention. If you find that 2 or 3 people are carrying your annual operations every year, and some of you, if you're in that situation, you know it, and you're like, oh my gosh, you're biting your fingernails about that. But this is the time to identify some of those tangible ways to start engaging more broadly with others, to start building small, but building out those annual giving efforts to make sure you try and work to begin to balance out the scales. So this is another distinction between annual and major gifts, and I sort of wove this into my comments throughout, and Megan even noted some of these things as well. But when folks want to make a major gift, they're not looking just to keep the lights on. They want to solve and be part of some larger challenge or issue that's going on. They want to be part of a solution. There is more and more folks who are giving while they're living. This is an incredibly important distinction. If you look at 150 years ago in the industrial titans of Carnegie and Rockefeller, they didn't give much while they were living. These were legacies once they were dead and gone. That is not the case with people like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and others, and now this compact of trying to do this while they're living. When you have these donors living, the kind of engagement that takes place is very different. They're not looking to others to carry on their legacy. They themselves want to be part of that. And in your congregations, you should be prepared for that. There's a dance to be learned for sure. But if you want to take a major gift and presume that person who's given it will now stand on the sidelines, that might not work altogether too well. At the same time, once that person gives that gift, they can't be the one steering the bus or driving the bus either. So you have to navigate that effectively. So anyway, that's the real message: is that major gifts, they really want to have an impact and be part of solving that issue together with you.
Chip, can I stop you on that, because that's a really
Please do.
that's a very so you can go back to. So
go back, yeah.
For some of these pastors here that are a little concerned about that, with growing issues within the church and some of the big givers saying, "Hey, look, how have you done that at the college?" Maybe that's the best question. So have you had some big donors that say, "Hey, I want this"?
Absolutely. They're very significant. If I were to, we just completed a campaign, and for Lycoming College, it was a very significant accomplishment. We had a goal of about 65 million. We ended up raising just over 79 million over the course of that campaign. And where we ended up making huge ground on the major gifts front was both in terms of facility construction that we needed to do, and as well as endowed scholarships. We have remained committed to being a place of opportunity. And so even just this, in fact, about a month ago, we had a graduate who was from Mexico. He was the governor of the state of Puebla, and he and his wife were in a helicopter on Christmas Eve, late 2018. That helicopter went down in a crash and both of them were killed. Their parents, in their memory and legacy, made a very significant 7-figure endowed scholarship for a brilliant but poor student. And I think it was our consistent engagement with that family, with the governor himself. We had been down about 3 times to Mexico to engage with him, to keep him apprised of the nature and character of the institution and the work that it's doing. We had established a relationship with he had established the state of Puebla. This is going to get on going too long here, but the state of Puebla was modeling itself from a higher education standpoint to the city of Boston. So they had about 8 or 10 institutions right in the heart of Puebla. And so we established exchange programs with 2 of those institutions. All of that work, while it was done for the betterment of the institution and our students, ultimately that the engagement of that work is what landed and what ended up in saying this family saying, okay, this is where we want our son's legacy to be. So they've done a gift now, and then through their estate, they will be giving an additional 7 to 8 figure commitment for scholarships. So that is just a matter of doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons that ultimately translates to that kind of commitment.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So we've got a lot of material, and I think Meg and I both have gone like 20 minutes on our first section. So I'm gonna skip through some of this. What these slides do are, again, it's just further looking at donor life cycles and the characteristics of gifts, what's important and how you evaluate and do this work over time with your constituents. I'm literally just going to skip over much of this stuff so we have some time to go back to Megan and then also engage in some questions together.
Thank you, Chip. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Sometimes my Zoom doesn't work. So one thing, as Chip was talking, and I was thinking in the effort of time, if there were a couple things we wanted to leave you with, and I think stewardship, and when you think about where a university differs from a church, we've already kind of acknowledged your annual giving is hands down so much better than I think any college or university, because you're in front of the people every week, and people, they tithe, they give money regularly. Where a university starts to differentiate themselves is we keep data and we watch trends of people's giving, and we have databases that we put information. So every time I meet with someone, so if I meet with Frank today and I have coffee, and if he shared his previous career, I would put that into a database. So that way it helps when I am ready to do that ask, that I really know the full picture of them. And so I think that's really important. The other space is stewardship. And so when we use the word stewardship in fundraising, it's telling the story of appreciation and what their gift has accomplished. And I would say that's another space that a university has differentiated themselves and put a lot of research. So an example at Hopkins, and I know Chip has this at his school, is we have criteria. So once somebody hits a certain level of giving, like for Hopkins, it's $100,000. They will get a visit and a letter every year from somebody at the university to say, thank you for your gift. Even if that gift was made 20 years ago, we will be in front of them. And the reason why we're in front of them is because, as Chip said, most givers are repeat givers. And there's always estate gifts, and there's also family legacies. So if you're going to think about things that you can do immediately, and Chip, if you can go to the next slide, it's just things we can do. Oops, the next one after that, actually, I'll skip through that one. So it's to involve others, to let people know what they're doing to accomplish, to stay in contact with them, but also making sure that, something so simple, as Chip mentioned, the taxes have really changed our annual giving. But something so simple is sending out an annual statement of what people give to your church or your organization is very, especially with the weekly gifts, because just to get a count, so they can use that with their accountant if they choose to. That is the type of stewardship things that if you can put those systems in place, that would actually help you and also help your record keeping. So it's about record keeping as well. People want to know, like, how much should I give this year? What am I doing? Identify roles. Next slide, please. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Just invite them to events. So things that we do at the university is we have these stewardship events, so we recognize things. Well, in a church, how do you do that, right? Because you're supposed to be treating everybody equal, and you should be. But you can do a special one-on-one time with the pastor or with you as the pastor. Never underestimate you as a leader, the impact of giving that time to someone. So we do that on the university side through meetings with the president or meetings with the dean. This is where you just kind of give them an update of the inside scoop of what it is like to run a church, what it's like to run a school, and share those thoughts with your donors. Now, you can't do that with everyone, but if you're keeping track of who you have and who's regularly giving, you find your regular donors and you find people who are consistent and who also, it's not always about the dollar. So I do want to differentiate here. So when we think about universities, Chip is, he raised a lot of money. Hopkins raises a lot of money. But the important thing is that you value every dollar you receive. And so at a place like Hopkins, we struggle. We got $1.8 billion from Michael Bloomberg. But I can tell you that if I don't get the regular $100 or $500 gifts from our alumni, the school would not go on as we would like it to. And with the larger gifts, sometimes there are strings attached that cost more money. And so you have to be careful with going down those conversations as well. So we invite people to things. We make people feel special and things along that. There's something, with technology, something even if you get a gift that's bigger, these days with cell phones, you can do videos and just thank people. You can do things to make things personal. That's really what we started doing. There's a program called Thank You that you can actually do personal
messages. We use that too,
messages.
Megan. It's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's an awesome platform. The cost can be a little bit, but maybe you can get something through the foundation that people can get licenses. But it's a really compelling way, an easy way to make people feel thanked. And so I want to stop there. We have some of the notes and you can contact us. But those are just some of the Stewardship Touch publications, tribute books, videos. But the thing is, have fun with it. I was just sharing with Frank before the church that I belong to at Christmas time, and I think Chip touched on this too. Partnerships with other organizations are important when you can show impact. So one thing our church does is shows things that it can do in Baltimore City, because I'm outside of Baltimore. Shows like how we're helping people who might not have the resources. Another thing is around Christmas. They said, instead of buying your grandparents or your parents that sweater, make a gift to us for $25 and give them an ornament to show what you've done in their honor. Things like that actually don't cost your organization money. I ended up buying a fair amount, and people actually, they want to be able to do something with, and then they can give the gift to someone else. So during that time period, I shared with Frank, they raised, I think, 30 to 40,000 over a 2 or 3 week period. That's really an easy way to raise money. So be creative and have fun with it. Next slide. So Chip.
Oh yeah. So this is our summary slide, and so one of the most important things, and often and Frank, if we do have a couple minutes, if there aren't questions, I think you had suggested, should we do a,
yes.
I don't know if your role play suggestion was between we as presenters, but maybe we could do that. But
Sure.
Often what is built into our time together are literally the opportunity for you to build and write a case of support, to practice that with those within your group, and then even to do some practice solicitations. So often that is, or generally has been part of the work. So some of these summary statements, you'll note that here. Oh, this is important information here. Thank you,
I just
Frank.
published the poll. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, good.
No, you're good. You're summarizing. Great.
Okay. So obviously, know thy donor. Megan, I think, outlined this very, very early on. But this is commandment number one when you're doing stewardship and fundraising work. it is important to be engaged and to know them deeply and what they care about, and making sure that those things align with the mission of the church and the work that you want to accomplish. One of the things we often really talk about is, gosh, who chooses to go into fundraising for a career? How do you land there? I wouldn't say this is what my son might put on his career path in 7th grade, but I can say that now that in doing this work together, I think Megan and I would both share the notion that this is a joyful experience, and it can be, and it should be, a very joyful experience for those who are giving. People are giving because they are now at a point in their lives where they are not just thinking about themselves. If to turn this back on the church, when I went to divinity school, the notion of original sin was really this kind of, curved into yourself, and that's all you can really do. You are not able to stand up and look out and see the needs of others. And so, giving and philanthropy is very much tied to that. And so we should celebrate the joy in being able to ask for gifts. Giving and asking is indeed an act of love. This is a process of really invitation. We are inviting people to be part of something bigger than themselves and to be generous. Megan also said this early on. She said, I very rarely have anyone who actually gets angry when I ask them for a gift, or you ask them for something that they can't afford to do, or they even somebody, gosh, I'm flattered you think I could actually do that much. I've had those kind of exchanges as well, which means maybe you've asked at the right place to make them a little bit uncomfortable with the language that we used earlier, which I very much agree with. This is about, go ahead, Megan.
Sorry, Chip, we have a question though.
Oh, good.
So it said, I've learned that younger generations have more financial burdens and don't support the church as loyal givers as boomers, i.e. less tithers. How do we deal with that, because boomers are aging and dying out? So how about I'll take a stab at it and then Chip. So this is a question we are struggling with as well. Younger generation, how do you get people to give regularly? We do by getting them involved. And so we put them on committees. We have them help mentor students. We put them on reunion. We bring them back and we ask them to do different things. In the church, the way you can do it is, every time you have a church, you need greeters. You need people to help with parking. You need people to do different things. Figure out ways that people, remember when we mentioned work, wisdom, wealth? Sometimes with the younger generation, they want to know exactly what their money is going towards. And that's been really hard for a place like Hopkins because, we didn't always say where the $25 went. And we are really spending a lot of time right now making spaces where people can make an impact and telling them what that impact is. That appeals to the younger generation. And to be honest, we also worried about that. We had the great generation and the baby boomers. The younger generation, they're giving. They're just not giving us consistently. I don't know if Chip, you've had the same experience.
Thanks, Megan. I think that's a great overview, and I'd agree with that. I think part of what we need to remember is that, and this is one of the slides that we just really grazed over, but what we call the donor life cycle. Baby boomers didn't act like baby boomers in the 1970s. They acted like, poor young people who were just getting out of work and also had student debt. And so the life cycle of these folks is that often when they are younger, they are burdened with other obligations. And so Megan noted, what are some of the ways that in lieu of you having significant dollars to give away, what are some of the other ways that you're going to start to be involved so that when you do have greater capacity, you can do that? I understand kind of I think what is the meta concern, which is are students or are young people really indebted more than others? Are they committing themselves to buying larger homes? Are they spending more on cars and generationally what we did? Those, I think, are really important questions to get your arms around. There's a lot of data out there, and we wrestle with this all the time in our space, but student loan debt. That is a real significant challenge. I will tell you at the undergraduate level, though, that's the change in debt relative to income and relative to what debt students took 30 years ago is actually very little. It's almost unchanged. Where the massive growth in debt is on graduate and professional school. It's about, again, that 80-20 rule. Over 80% of the debt is held by under 20% of those who've taken out student loans. And so these are all little pieces where sometimes it's helpful to go to dig beneath the surface and get a handle on what's really going on. I do think that we do have a challenge for young people if they are not getting into good jobs early on. That is probably the highest risk to those people becoming good and generous folks. I think that understanding and maybe the donor lifestyle can be helpful, but it's a reminder that all of us kind of go through that process. And Megan probably knows this story better than I, but one of the great stories about Michael Bloomberg was that his first gift to Hopkins was what, $5 or something like that?
$5.
Yeah. So, all of us, we do what we can when we can, and that hopefully when the time comes and we're able to be more generous, we do that. But it's about doing all the other things at the right time with the right people that will ultimately translate to them doing more when they're able.
And then the other question is about the elevator speech for a major gift. So so we can do that. Let me give you a couple of things that I do before I even do the elevator speech. I think it's important that I ask for permission. So usually when I meet with someone, and when we do the major gift meetings, what we do is we thank them for their continuous giving, or we talk about their experience with the church. And then I say to them, part of my job is to bring resources to the school. And that is a lot of what your job is to build the parish, but your job is also to bring resources. And I will then say to them, is it okay that I speak to you about the opportunities we have to give or needs that we have? And so I usually will ask permission, and then I will give them a proposal that will talk about things. But as far as my elevator speech, so let's say it is, and I'm going to try to do this quick on the feet. Let's say it's about financial aid. And actually, I'll use Bloomberg because Bloomberg actually, it's really great that he gave money, but it has caused some, he was an engineer, so he graduated from my school, which is great. But sometimes our alumni will say, well, you have Bloomberg. You don't need my money. I can give to another organization. I can give to my church. Why should I give to you? So what I often share is, fortunately, a lot of the people that came, I think we have 65% of the students that come to Hopkins come on financial aid. We have about 20 Pell eligible, as Chip mentioned, that's for families that make over 50,000. But an elevator speech that I would use here is, Frank, thank you for seeing me. One of my jobs is to bring funds into the school. One of our greatest needs is our financial aid. And we have various needs, from scholarship to providing tools for students to come to campus. And while we were very fortunate to get the Bloomberg money, it has also provided us with areas that we need more help in. And so, for instance, we have students that are coming to campus that might not have the means to buy a suit to go on interviews, or to here's a story that I often share. It's really about sharing stories. So on campus, we use what's called the J card to buy coffees. Well, one of the things that we realized that we had is in the libraries, there was a coffee shop that didn't take the J card. So let's say Frank and I are studying together. Frank comes from wealth. I do not. Frank buys me a cup of coffee. The next time we're studying together, I want to buy Frank a cup of coffee, but they don't take the J card. So right there, that sets up a social difference between us that we're trying to erase when people set foot on campus. We want people, no matter what socioeconomic background, what race, what country, to feel that they are all equal and that they all have the same resources. And so if you would consider helping us narrow that gap with a gift, which could be endowed or outright, that would really help us. And then you pause. And that's the other thing, is to kind of be silent. So I don't know, Chip, if you want to take a run. I know that was quick, so I'm sorry. I just off the top of my head.
Go for it, Chip.
That was great. And that's probably along the same lines. For us, it is all about about access and making sure that students don't graduate overburdened by debt. And so it is often that phrase, almost identical framing, is that higher education, indeed, by getting an undergraduate degree, first off, and then if you go to get an additional professional or advanced degree, there is a direct, the data demonstrates there's a direct correlation between that and income that is earned over a lifetime. And so it is still an incredibly powerful tool, but the reality is that still a massive number of our young people don't have access to it, and access to a good place that's going to actually get them where they need to be. And so that's often what we argue. If you look at families that are in the first quintile of income versus the bottom quintile of income, 80% of students in the top quintile of income in this country will immediately start into a 4-year degree. If you're in the bottom quintile, you are only at about 45% inclined to go to school right out of high school. That is absolutely part of our message, because we say that is the work that we do. We find those talented kids and we give them an opportunity. And so your support is the great equalizer. It is what enables those folks to come and have an extraordinary experience where they don't look, feel, and have to, go in and one kid gets to buy the beautiful filet mignon steak and the other one gets a grilled cheese. You all eat from the same place. Well, until COVID.
So the last question, just to make sure we get to, is about how COVID-19 changed the way we identify donors with whom you have no relationship with. So there's a couple of things here. For Hopkins, most of the people we deal with have a relationship because they're alums, but that doesn't mean we actually have a relationship with them, right? We know them because they went there. I'd say we probably are in touch with probably 10 to 12% that regularly we know and we visit with. So this is a really good question. And to kind of go back to the baby boomer question too, it's involvement, right? And so how do you get people involved? And I'm going to try to put it in terms for the church, that what we do on the university, but some people have church groups, and they've now made virtual church groups, like Bible studies. But what I've seen some churches do is they'll have it according to age groups. They'll have it according to marital status, where they bring groups together to get people involved. And so as you identify donors, so now that you're a lot online with virtual churches, I would imagine, until you go back to where it used to be, ask questions. So just like Frank did a poll, like ask people to do things afterwards. Or a lot of times a church, if you are using Zoom, there's a capability in Zoom to break out into breakout rooms from big groups. And so ask people if they like to still stay and talk, and start to get to know people, or ask them to fill out information about themselves, and then contact them and schedule a Zoom call. Things like that is what we're doing. What we have found is, for people you have established relationships, Zoom is fine. For establishing new ones, it takes a little bit more engagement. And so you have to build that connection a little bit more, but offer, like we do conversations with the dean or coffees with the pastor. You could do coffees with the pastor where you bring in 15 people and you just talk. Especially with the older population. The younger, I think, are a little hard because they're probably zoomed out through their work days. But try to engage and think about different ways that you could communicate. And I don't know, Chip, if you have anything to add.
No, I don't know that I have a whole lot to add. I agree that technology has been a huge asset. I'll just share one specific thing we've done, which is utilizing technology. We've been able to do a whole lot of more affinity type of engagement. So we have reached out to understand from folks who often don't interact with us as much in their own industry. So we've gone to teachers, secondary teachers, both at the elementary and secondary level, and said, hey, tell us how you responded to COVID. What can we learn? And we had members from our education department. We have a call tomorrow night with our entire history department, and learning from those who are out in industry who majored in history and what they're doing and how they've responded. And so for us, we've done it around affinity groups and to really ask for their wisdom. And so as the old, I'm gonna miss the ask for advice, you get money, or ask for money, you get advice, ask for advice, you get money. That's sort of the pivot that we've made in this case, and engaging around affinity groups. And it's really been quite effective, really been surprised. We did the same thing with financial advisors, whoever's doing that work, and to learn and hear from them and what the nature of their work looks like. So that's what we have, that's one of the tools we've done, Joe.
That's awesome. Well, guys, we're right up against our hour, a little over, but thank you. It's always one of my favorite times. This is like the fourth time we've had you guys here. You're always great. It's always very eye-opening to see. We call it the competition, but really we're all trying to do the same thing. I love, giving and asking is an act of love. That's something I'm going to be using in the future. So there's a lot of great tools in here. We will have the PowerPoint presentation on our website. We'll also have a copy of this. So for those of you seeing it later, Jack Brooks will be speaking on July 8th. Please keep Jack in his prayers. His brother passed away last week. As you know, he's lost his mother and his wife in the past 2 years. So it's a tough time for Jack right now too. But really appreciate Megan and Chip and Annabelle. Thanks for coming today. And all of you are out there. We appreciate what you're doing. You're on the front lines. In a really exciting and unique time. And we are just so thankful to have you guys here. So thank everyone. Have a wonderful day. Take care. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you all.
Thank
Pleasure
you.
to be with you.
Yeah, and if anyone ever wants to contact either one of us, I know Chip would be open to it. We're here to help
Absolutely.
if you want us to look at something or give feedback, because we know this was shorter than usual.
What's it, Megan? Can they just email you? Is that the best thing to do that?
Yeah, and just a warning, if you email me once or email me twice, sometimes we're getting a lot of emails right now, and I might be able to schedule a call. My weekdays are busy, but weekends are open, and I'm more than happy to help in any way that I can.
Okay, we'll put that on the website. So however you want to do it, just let us know, and we'll do that for both of you. We really just appreciate you doing this for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. It's a pleasure. We'll look forward to keeping in touch.
Awesome. God bless.